The first requirement regarding the storage of food in fridges and freezers is that all raw foods must be separated from ready-to-eat foods. Ready-to-eat food means that it is in a form that is edible without additional preparation to achieve food safety. This means raw foods must be stored below and ready-to-eat foods above. In all cases, it is most ideal to have separate storage units for the various food groups. However, in most kitchens, it is impossible to do so. In such cases, we advocate the following. Any foods that have been cut or prepared and will not undergo any further cooking, such as items used to make salads, should be stored in the uppermost shelves. Fruits and vegetables that have not been cut or prepared, we expect raw vegetables to contain bacteria from the soil, can be stored below ready-to-eat foods. Following these, raw meats and fish should be stored below the above items, as these have the highest amount of bacteria present and are therefore most likely to cause harm should cross-contamination take place. It is also recommended that shellfish be stored separately from all else due to the severity of allergic reactions. All foods should be covered, date-coded and labelled in order to ensure that a good stock rotation system is in place. Using the first in, first out rule should always apply. So what is FIFO? First in, first out is the basic rule of stock rotation and simply means any delivered or purchased foods that are the first to enter the kitchen, usually also meaning having been opened, must be stored in the frontmost part of the shelf and used before any other items. Thus you rotate your stock so that no foods end up expired, which adds unnecessarily to your food costs. FIFO also assumes that the first purchased products have an earlier expiry date than products that are purchased later. Color-coded containers make the process a lot easier to quickly identify where foods should be stored. Ultimately, the best practice recommendations should be designed to streamline compliance to food safety, and the above example is a perfect illustration of how to keep good practice that will work when busy or quiet conditions in the kitchen. Food storage in the fridge is one of the most important principles in food safety. Perishable foods by its very nature do not last as long as we would like. This is why we need to keep foods in the fridge, to prolong the time it takes for the foods to go off. But keeping foods in the fridge is not just about temperature and keeping the cold chain. It is also about storing foods in a way that prevents cross-contamination and food poisoning. One of the biggest problems in the kitchen is storage space in fridges. The fridge is probably one of the most cramped spaces you'll find. Everything from ready-to-eat meals, raw meats, and veg to dairy and sauces need to be stored in a fridge to ensure that foods do not expire before the use-by date. That leaves us with a very large group of foods that need refrigeration and a very little space to store them in. The most ideal case would be to separate the food groups into their own fridges, which means raw meats should have their own fridge, fruits and vegetables should be stored separately from dairy products, and ready-to-eat meals should be stored separately from all the above. The reality is that most kitchens don't have the luxury of separating these foods in this manner. One of the biggest mistakes kitchens still make today is that they store raw foods with ready-to-eat foods, usually due to restricted space. So what is the safest alternative? The most efficient way to use your space effectively is to understand the risks of causing food poisoning. This means knowing what the risks of the various food groups are. We know that raw meats and vegetables are riskier because they have a high amount of bacteria that are naturally present in these foods. These foods are considered to have a high bacterial load. Collectively, we will consider these uncooked foods. Notice that I didn't mention fruits. Although fruits should be washed before use, they are not considered raw products because they are ready to eat, meaning no further processing needs to happen before you can eat these foods. The next category of foods are those that do not require any cooking or processing before food can be consumed. This includes salads, cooked foods, dairy, and processed foods. These are the foods that should not have any bacteria present because they have a direct risk of causing food poisoning. Raw meats, poultry, and seafood are the main culprits when it comes to high bacterial load. We expect that these foods will have dangerous bacteria in them, so it seems logical that we want to keep these away from foods that do not have bacteria in them. Vegetables, due to the farming process, can contain bacteria in them and are in the next risk category. We should never keep raw vegetables with salad ingredients and prepared foods. Vegetables, especially those farmed organically, are not always washed and cleaned, removing the soil, chemicals, and manure. These could contain bacteria seriously dangerous to our health. All prepared foods, cooked foods, and dairy should be treated as ready to eat and should always be stored separately from raw foods. So now that we understand the risks of the food categories and we know what we need to do to separate raw and ready to eat foods, how do we do this? Raw meats should be stored on the lowest possible shelf. Red meats and poultry should be stored separately. This is because chicken is notorious for having Salmonella, Campylobacter, and Listeria monocytogenes, more so than any other raw meat. However, if your space is limited, these products will be cooked and should kill the bacteria. Fish and seafood should be stored on the same line but separately from raw meats. Seafood carries less dangerous bacteria and certainly different bacteria from the common food poisoning bacteria. However, many people are prone to seafood allergies, especially shellfish, such as prawns. You'd do well to keep these away from any other foods. Vegetables should be stored on the next lower shelf above the raw meats. Most bacteria live on fruits and vegetables, can easily be washed off with soapy water and a suitable vegetable sanitizer. These carry less bacteria and do not leak blood. Raw meats will always have blood spillage, which carry millions of bacterial cells. Usually, fruits and vegetables are stored separately from meats because they require different holding temperatures. Fruits and vegetables tend to change color or lose their quality at cooler temperatures, especially at temperatures that are required to keep meats fresh. The ideal operating temperature for a vegetable fridge is between 5 and 7 degrees Celsius. Salad ingredients and cooked food should always be stored above all else and can be stored with dairy. In ideal circumstances, the above food should be stored separately from each other, but there is no real risk if the ingredients are correctly washed. Cooked foods can be kept up to 3 days before the natural bacteria in these start to grow to high numbers, causing foods to go off. Dairy products such as milk, cream, yogurt, and cheese are very low risk and do not harbor dangerous bacteria. This seems fairly simple, and it can be if you store your foods neatly and have sufficient space. Leftovers and cooked foods, if they were handled correctly and were reheated, can be kept for a maximum of 3 days. Defrosting foods can carry a high risk in the fridge. This is because during the defrosting process, juices and blood will collect and build up, which can leak out and onto the foods below it. Foods that are cooked and will only be needed or eaten later should never be left out in the kitchen. This is because temperature ranges from 20 to 45 degrees Celsius are directly within the range at which bacteria rapidly multiply. This means that cooling foods need to be placed in the fridge in an uncovered manner until cooled to fridge temperature. This is a high-risk time when anything falling into these foods can cause contamination. This means that the topmost shelf should be kept for the cooling process. The next step in safe food storage is to further ensure no cross-contamination can occur. We do this by using sealable containers. Storing each food group into clear, sealable containers locks in freshness and prevents any outside contamination. This practice should also ensure the longevity of your foods by limiting exposure to the outside environment. This prevents odors as well. Keeping a record of when food was prepared will help minimize expired foods and will help the first in, first out policy. This is achieved by the use of date codes. Raw meats can either be left in their original containers until fully defrosted or prepared. Whole fruits and vegetables should be transferred from any box, washed, rinsed, and placed into plastic containers. These do not have to be covered but should be fully dried before storing. Any foods that undergo preparation, this means cutting, cooking, peeling, etc., need to be placed in a sealable container and appropriately covered. Sauces, milk, and cream, and any liquids that come in with a reusable lid should be kept in their original container. Cartons that cannot be closed should be transferred to sealable containers.